Well, it is a tremendous honor to welcome to the African Women in Law Legacy Project the Chief Justice of Kenya, Martha Koome. So, Chief Justice, many people think that judges are born with a black robe, or the black robe is their first onesie. I know that's not true of you. And so I wanted you to share where you grew up and how you grew up, and what was your inspiration as a young girl to get an education?
Thank you. I think they need to hear my story.
Yes.
So that they can know judges are not born in robes. They need to hear my story right from the village where I started my journey. Born in the rural areas of Meru. Meru is about 300 kilometers from Nairobi. That's where I was born, to a polygamous household. My father and two wives. My father was a peasant farmer. What I mean is that he did not have a job and did not have a business. In other words, we just grew whatever we ate and sold the surplus for us to survive. And we were 18 children. My mother had 9, and my stepmother had 9 children. My mother was the first wife, and out of the 9, I'm the 8th born. And in the whole pack of 18, I am the 14th born. So it was a struggle even to grow up, to go to school, but I give credit to my mother because she herself never went to school. Even my father never went to school. But she believed in education. She was one of the first women who got converted to Christianity in the rate, I think, in the early 60s. Because as long as I can remember, we were always going to church on Sunday. And on Wednesday evening, we would go to church as well, a fellowship. And I would always follow my mother and my aunties. So they were converted, my mother and my aunties, to Christianity. And therefore, they were taught about some retrogressive customary practices like FGM, female genital mutilation, and that's why we escaped the cat, all of us, because of my mother. And she believed in education because she had seen my cousins, 2 of my cousins who had gone to school and become teachers. And her prayer, because she was a very prayerful woman. In fact, my mother had scars on her knees because she would wake up and kneel down and pray. Before we slept, she prayed, and she mentioned the names of all our children and the people in trouble, praying for them. And our prayer was that we would lead a different life from herself. So we were encouraged to go to school because she kept on telling us we'll lead a better life than her. In other words, we'll not make a living working on the land to get food and to sell surplus for our children. And indeed, my third-born sister went to school very successfully. She went to the university, and in 1973, she graduated.
The first in your family?
The first in the village.
In the village?
In the one we could talk about as far as I could remember, because she brought so much joy in the village. There was so much celebration. I was a little girl then, but I told myself I will graduate. I didn't know with what or how, but I told myself if this is what it means to bring so much joy in the village, I will do the same. And of course, she was an inspiration to me that it is possible. And every time my mother would remind me that, you can also graduate like your sister, Kadure. So I went to school. It was very difficult, but I managed because you have to overcome every obstacle. For me, I didn't have to be taught gender. I learned it all. Because like when I passed my primary school to go to secondary school, we passed together with my brother, my stepbrother, who had repeated. But when we passed and we were all called to secondary school, my mother said he cannot afford to take us to school, both of us, because he had sold a cow. I can understand he probably didn't want to sell 2 or 3. And my mother and he told me to repeat. My father told me repeat, so that he could recoup his resources to take me to school next time. But my mother was not happy. She was like, she thinks I should go to school because I have passed very well. And you see, as you pass, the brothers are exempt from domestic chores. Mm-hmm. When we come from school, I have to fetch water. I have to fetch firewood. I have to go to the garden and get a banana and cook for them. The room where they used to stay, they had their own small hut where they were staying because they were already circumcised. They had a lantern and they could read. When we come from school, they'll just change from their uniform. They just walk around, put their hands in the pockets. And, so for me, I have to make sure we cook with my mother. And I actually take to them food. The lantern was needed in the kitchen, so I could not take it to go and do my homework. But for them, they had their house, they had the lantern, they could do everything they wanted in their room. I had to be with my mother. We cook. In the morning, I wake up in the morning, I make the fire, I put water in the fire for my mother to come and make the porridge or the tea. Then I quickly wash my face, take the tea to them, and then we go to school together. I just remember one of my bigger brothers, who was my stepbrother, was very kind to me because he would always wait for me. We used to cross a forest before we reached school.
Because you were walking to school.
We were walking.
Yes.
And we never had shoes.
Yeah, how many kilometers?
It's probably 5 kilometers one way, and the other way another 5 kilometers. But we would trek. But for him, he would not leave the gate until I have come. The other boys would just walk, but he would always wait for me. We walked to school and back. He died last year, and I was very sad because he was very kind to me. So that's how we went to primary school, walking, bare feet. We had no sweaters. Sweater was not part of the school uniform. We got it when we went to secondary school. So
what about rain? What about rain?
When it rained, you cut a banana. You cut a banana leaf and you cover yourself. That's the umbrella because we never had umbrellas. So when it rained, you run, you cut a banana leaf, you cover yourself, you get home. And we never got sick because God has a way of protecting people. So after primary school, my father now said he can only recoup money for my brother because he was older. My mother said we have to try as much as possible and go to school. That particular time, my sister, who had graduated, had migrated to the US with her husband. She had just gotten married. She got married in 1975, and in 1976, they moved to the US. So we were not she was in the US far away. She probably doesn't even know what is happening because communication was not as fast as it is now. You had to write a letter, take it to the post office and send it, and I don't even know when it would reach. So during this particular time, she was away. So my mother and we had to go to the garden and pick beans. It was January. We harvest sometime late in January, like early February. But that particular time, the beans were not ready, all of them. So we picked the patches which were ready, thrashed, went to the market, sold, And I went to school. I went to Form 1. Upon entering Form 1, that was it. And that's why I always tell people, when you see a child who is in need of going to school, just ensure they enter. Once they have entered, everything else will happen. Somehow, peace will be found. That's what my mother did to make sure that I went to school. And the school where I went, I hear people say, oh, we have to be visited during visiting day. Nobody visited me when my mother took me to school. And it was with the help of a cousin of mine who happened to say, I know where that school is. I will find for you a driver of these vehicles that ply between Meru Town and Chuka who knows the school, and will take you, and I'll make sure Mom returns home. So I went to Chuka Girls, and from 1 to 4, I passed well. I was still aiming to go to the university. It was a simple village school, which was really teaching commercial subjects like typing, shorthand, business English. The aim was to train secretary. It was really a secretarial kind of a college, but it had other subjects. And I did very well. That's why I'm a secretary. I typed my own things. I didn't know it would come in handy, because that's where I learned to type. So I did well, and I went to high school from 5 and 6 in Muranga, Mogoiri Girls. By that time, my sister had come back from the US, and she was teaching in a college, Igoji Teachers College. So my problems came to an end, because after school, I would close school and go babysit her children. She would pay my school fees. And I didn't have any problems from 5 and 6. I finished and got married early also. Got married immediately after school because I think when you're in the village and you are good looking, you have a good disposition, everybody looks at you. But thank God, the guy I married was a good guy. Koome, my husband, is good. He has encouraged me all through. I went to the university when I was married. I had my child when I was in the university, my firstborn child. So sometimes when I was being interviewed for this job, and I was asked, why didn't you pass so well in the university? And I looked at them and I said, surely you can't understand my story, because I had to breastfeed on one side and write the term paper with the other hand. And also you are cooking. And when you get married early, you'll also have in-laws visit you.
Yes.
So you're cooking for your husband, for your child, for the in-laws. You are a wife for the community. So you have to do all those wifely duties and read and pass. That time, my classmates are having fun in college. They are partying. I left that university without even knowing where the swimming pool was. So it was really a journey. But I also need to mention to you that when choosing the subjects, what to become or what profession to join, it's not that I knew that I would become a lawyer. I just happened to pass very well my A-level. The maximum you could get was like 19 points, and I had 16. So that was a high pass mark for law. But all I knew was education, like my sister. I just wanted to be like my sister.
And you didn't know a lawyer or a judge?
I hadn't seen one. So
so how did you check the box for law? Did a teacher encourage you, or?
Yes. So now, because of passing so well, people started telling me these grades are actually good for law. And my sister also told me, I think these grades are also good for law. So go to the university and ask to change from education to law. And that's what I did. I went and asked whether I can switch from education to law. It wasn't difficult because my marks were good. So that's how I studied law. Went to Nairobi University, studied law, went to the Kenya School of Law, and by the time I was finishing Kenya School of Law, now I had my second born. I started practice. While practicing is where I came into real realization about the gender inequality and the discrimination against women, which was embedded in the law. That particular time, even the Constitution, before we repealed our former Constitution, because it allowed and protected customary law. Mm-hmm. And you know, customary law discriminated against women. It is like, it's against our customs for women to inherit property. Mm-hmm. It is against our customs for a woman to have custody of children. Children belong to men. It's against, and you know, these customs are not written anywhere. They keep shifting according to the circumstances. This is not for women. Women cannot do this. Women cannot own this. Women cannot occupy these positions. Leadership is for men. It's not written anywhere. It's just, you know, traditionally what is accepted. And so the law firm that I first joined, very nice two gentlemen who trained me in law. And after I finished, they offered me a job. But in their law firm, they said family matters are very tiring. Women come there with emotional baggages. They need extra care because they will be crying. They don't even have money. Their cases are just too expensive for the law firm, but you can do them. So every case that came for child custody, for division of matrimonial property, for succession for a woman who has been disinherited, they would be passed to Martha. And therefore, I spent so much time in court for these cases. And I did a lot of research. And I realized that the issues of women need more than myself to advocate for all reform. And these women are substantive women who were my role models. Women I would see being driven on the back seat, and I would dream to be driven in cars like those. Suddenly will be thrown out of their matrimonial homes, and they are homeless. They have come to seek for legal advice. And when you go to court, judges are in a hurry. They are not understanding where you are coming from when you go and see this woman has been thrown out of her matrimonial home with 5 children. I need an order to restore her back, to injunct her husband from throwing her out. And they would be like, go and serve the husband, bring him here. So I'll serve the husband and bring him here. And I argue my case that you cannot throw away a woman and 5 children. If you don't feel like staying in this house with them, it is easier for you to pack one suitcase and go and let your wife and children stay in the house. Mm-hmm. But it was a happy task. We did not have a law on division of matrimonial property. We were relying on 1882 Married Women's Property Act of England. since we became independent. It's only about 6 years ago after the new constitution that we have enacted laws to protect family. So we were using those colonial legislations, and they were really short in terms of protection of women and family.
Now, let me ask you for a minute, because I know at the time you were bringing these cases, there were very few women in court and almost no women judges. True?
There were 2 women judges. The Honorable the Justice Effie Owo, the very first woman magistrate and judge and Court of Appeal judge, and the Honorable the Justice Joyce Arwoch. Later on, Justice Nambui also became a judge. By the time we were getting the new constitution, we had 5 women judges, but among 60 men or so. So that time, there were very few women also practicing. You could count them with your fingers. But we were very aggressive. I believe you interviewed the Justice Nancy Barasa, who was the first Deputy Chief Justice under the new constitution. And because of the law and the practice, we felt we needed to come together as FINDA and advocate seriously for law reform. That is how I joined FINDA, so that we could speak in one solid voice to seek for law reform that is favorable to women.
And I'm going to ask you about FIDA and the many successes FIDA had, but could you take a moment to just talk about the power of ideas when one person gets an idea and how you bring others together in a leadership way? Because young people see things they're frustrated with, and they want to make a change. And they're thinking, I'm just one person. How can I make a change? So with those odds that you all had, because by this time you were in your own firm, right? You didn't accept that offer. You were focused a lot on cases with women. So how did you pull together to be able to move forward with FIDA?
When you have an idea that you want to propagate, look for like-minded people, because that is what happened to me. That particular time, FIDA was there in its formative years. The chairperson was a lady called Lilian Waura, who was the chairperson of FIDA then in the early 80s. In the late 80s. She invited me to write a chapter on a book she was writing for FIDA on laws about women and law. The book was called Women and Law. She asked me to write a chapter on succession. How can a woman inherit property? And I penned that chapter, and I wrote all the problems. Despite the law, we have the customs that impede access to the women's rights to inheritance. When I finished writing that chapter, she told me to write another one on child custody. So I wrote. We did not even have a children's law then. The laws were scattered in 17 statutes before we consolidated it into the Children Act. By the way, we have now a new Children Act, which has been reviewed over the time to include now the children's rights under the Constitution. We've come a long way in terms of law reform here in Kenya. So what I'm trying to say is that no one should give up when they have a good idea about reforms. Find an organization that has similar objectives. Like FINDA now became the vehicle for law reforms, because I can attribute all the laws that have been reformed here on family and the very fundamental provisions entrenching the women's rights, including affirmative action, to the advocacy and lobbying that was done by FIDA.
I recall, because when I first came and I first met you, my sister, it was 2007. And I led a trial advocacy program at the Kenya School of Law. And there was Ann Amadi and Mumbi Ngugi, and we did the training for FIDA. And I remember visiting the FIDA office and weeping when I saw the films you had put together of the work you had done to help women, to enable women. And so I know you spent a lot of time working on different pieces of legislation to advance women, like the Sexual Offenses Act.
Yes. We did that. You know, the judge of the Supreme Court, Joaquin Domu, she served in Parliament immediately in 2002. She was nominated when we changed over the government from the Moi era to the Kibaki era. She was a nominated member of Parliament. She spearheaded the Sexual Offences Act, but out of the work that we had done at FIDA. Because in FIDA, we were always looking at the only way we can empower women is to remove the structural impediments, structural discrimination, i.e., the change of the Constitution, which we started advocating for and started getting some minimum reforms even before the overhaul of the Constitution. I remember in 1997 is the first time we had the law changed to say for the nominated seats in Parliament, there will be gender parity when distributing the nominations. There used to be 12 special seats. So we asked for at least they be given to women. We were expecting the 12 to be given to women so that we could increase the numbers of women, because we had come to the realization that women are needed also in decision making. Women are needed in Parliament where the laws are made, because if we had critical numbers of women in Parliament, then they would understand why we needed a law on division of matrimonial property. Because we cannot be using 1882 Married Women's Property Act of England. And when we go to court, some judges will throw it out. They say, but we have our own customs that determine. And don't you forget, these are male judges also, who are, conditioned to believe, or they are brought up to believe that, the property belongs to men. Why would a wife get a share of property? And women will come and they will give evidence that they actually contributed to the purchase of the property, but the property is in the name of the man. And, the judge will ask, but why isn't it in your name? And the woman will start crying. When you talk to her, she'll tell you, look, I got a loan from my cooperative society where I work. I took that money and gave it to my husband so that he could go and buy the property. I took another loan and gave him so that he could buy materials to build. Even if the woman wasn't working, she will give you stories of what she does at home. The husband is probably a businessman, but the woman is doing so much to support the husband. He could not even be in business, he could be working, an executive. But the woman is doing so much, growing all the food, making sure the workers who are working there, they are working, making sure the children are going to school, they are picked from school. She's doing all the cleaning, the washing, the cooking, and also, whatever is sold from the farm, the money will go to the account is controlled by the husband. Then the husband has bought the property. So they'll say, this is just a housewife who doesn't do any contribution. But I'm telling you, we were able to argue those cases to show even indirect contribution contribution made by a woman indirectly should be factored in as financial contribution. Otherwise, you'd have to pay a manager
Exactly.
a lot of salary to do all the work that the woman is doing, to keep your house going, to keep your children going. There's one case we did. The woman and like 9 children, some born through cesarean section. And when we went to court, the husband said, but this woman was just giving birth. She was always having cesarean section and just being bedridden. There's nothing she contributed. And one judge looked at him and said, look, but she gave birth to children who have increased the number of the members of your clan. The children belong to you, so don't talk like that. Mm-hmm. And that is one time I saw the judge recognize the indirect contribution and say the woman should actually inherit 50-50. So before the law came, we had made precedent through arguments in court in so many cases that now we're able to inform the Constitution when it talks about equal sharing of property acquired during marriage. We had made enough precedents by way of judgments of the cases we argued, which now resulted into the Matrimonial Property Act. So the young people now may not know the history of the work that was done by FIDA and by women who represented women then when there was no law. So you cannot be annoyed with the society. It's just that we have to fix things that are not working right and change the attitude and let everybody realize that when I'm in this position that I am in, I've been given a lot of power, authority, and privilege to change things. So I'm supposed to be sympathetic and have empathy. When I was doing this interview, I was a Court of Appeal judge. How many people are Court of Appeal judges? Mm-hmm. I was so grateful for having that privilege of serving in the Court of Appeal and having the privilege of appearing before these cameras to be interviewed for the position of the Chief Justice.